Hey everybody, Jim Cavale here, the founder and CEO of INFLCR. And as we serve 20,000 plus athletes with our technology, helping them build their brand on social media, we continue to want to learn more about what's to come when it's name, image, and likeness of these student athletes being addressed at the college level of sports. And we've got two great guests here today to talk about the recent bill passed in the state of Florida as it pertains to name, image, and likeness of student athletes. And that's Darren Heitner, who you've seen before on some of our content with INFLCR, including a podcast recently on my I Want Your Job podcast. And then Chip LaMarca, a congressman in the state of Florida, who's been a big part of making this bill happen. And so first, Darren, talk a little bit about what you do day to day and how you got involved with this bill.
Well, thanks for having me again. It's a pleasure to be a part of this video conference. Day to day, I own and operate a law firm called Heitner Legal in South Florida, in particular Fort Lauderdale. It just so happens that I'm living and working within the district that Representative Chip LaMarca represents. At my law firm, we do a lot of work, whether it be sports and entertainment related legal services, contractual representation or litigation, intellectual property work, whether it be trademarks, copyrights, right of publicity, etc. And so I was actually approached initially by a legislative aide of Chip LaMarca, Corey Stanicia, and he had mentioned to me his interest of putting this particular issue, the right and ability for college athletes to earn compensation based on their names, images, and likeness, in front of Representative LaMarca, and then if he was interested in the legislation, which was just a concept at that point in time, then sponsoring that type of legislation, that being Chip LaMarca, sponsoring it on the House floor in the Florida House of Representatives. And so that's really where the conversation started. It was very conceptual. It was prior to any legislation being drafted. It was in very close proximity to the state of California passing a piece of legislation somewhat similar, initially called the Pay for Play Act, that is effective 2023. As I think many people that are viewing this probably know, that was a piece of legislation that was passed and signed into law by the governor out in California, but there's a very broad window before it would go into effect. And so all of us sat down, we looked at the legislation, we certainly contacted many others who are influential in the world of college athletics, got their opinion and made modifications to the California legislation before initially proposing the legislation, which Chip LaMarca did in the Florida House. And it went through various stages after it went into the Senate, and I'll let Chip LaMarca speak on that. But, you know, when it was first proposed and announced, there was quite a bit of pushback, not necessarily from the NCAA, although broadly it was absolutely pushed back by the NCAA. But a lot of individuals didn't necessarily have a grasp on what it was that we were trying to accomplish. And I think one of the initial challenges was to mainly educate people, inform them that we're not proposing that college athletes earn a salary. We're not proposing that they become employees of the universities. We're not proposing that any monies flow through the universities to the students. Instead, it was providing these college athletes the same basic rights that every other college student has on each college campus, the right to exploit one's name, image, and likeness. And so I was thrilled that Chip LaMarca wanted to take on this issue. It's not necessarily something that's Republican or Democrat, but there ultimately Chip was able to get bipartisan support, and here we are today with both the House and Senate passing it, and hopefully the governor will sign it into law, effective 2021 as opposed to 2023 in California.
Chip, for you being in the district you're in and seeing this thing kind of come to fruition, just talk about it from your perspective.
Well, thanks. Darren did a great recap of kind of what happened. But really, this was something that my aide and I had talked about from time to time. He's a beer league hockey goalie and, loved sports and did some sports management in college. And ultimately, for me, I'm a fan of sports, but, this isn't my world, my life. And I'm a freshman, I'm 52 years old today. So I'm a freshman in the Florida House. The fact that I could get something like this passed through the House, through the Senate, and get the governor to sign it is a pretty big deal, but it became a big issue. What we ended up with is a governor who played college ball at Yale. He was captain of the baseball team at Yale, and when we pitched it to him, he liked the idea, but at the same time, he was very cautious on how we brought it forward. One of the things for me is that when we met with the governor, we got some ideas of what he'd like to see in it. What we ultimately brought forward was we had a committee of 3 large House committees: Judiciary, Education, and Judiciary, Education, and Commerce, the insurance side and all that. And ultimately what they brought back out of that for us was a much bigger and probably a friendlier version of what we ended up passing, but it included insurance, disability. If a student athlete was hurt, they wouldn't lose their scholarship, grant and aid, things like that, which, look, it sounds great. And it was all the right intentions of the Florida House and the leadership, which is in a majority Republican leadership. They wanted to take care of the athlete. But what we wanted to make sure we never lost was the name, image, and likeness piece, which is what we ended up getting last Friday at about 11 o'clock in the Florida House. We voted 98 to about 37 to pass this bill, and ultimately this. I'm sorry, it was closer to, was it 98 to about 14 or 15. So we had a strong support for it. When we had the insurance in it, we had 101 votes for it. It will go to the governor and get signed. Right now we're in a bit of this tough territory with respect to what our local and state governments should be doing, and that's dealing with a health outbreak. But ultimately, the governor, I believe strongly, will sign this, and we will put our student athletes, our collegiate athletes, in the posture where they can come to Florida schools, play any one of the sports at the collegiate level, as well as NAIA. Remember that the NAIA came out with this about 3 days before we passed this bill, saying we want to do this. We have 24 NAIA schools in the state of Florida, including Kaiser University, St. Thomas, University of Miami is actually also their NCAA, but they're also an independent college. So we spoke with all these folks along the way, the athletic directors and the presidents of the universities and colleges, and got kind of their opinion of where they were. We don't think for a minute they really wanted this to pass, but let's be honest, if you're going to have something pass, you want to have your stamp on it. You want to be able to have as much influence on what the final product is. And I think that's where Florida State, Miami, FAU, USF, UCF, we met with them all. And ultimately we ended up with a bare bones name, image, likeness package a year further than I wanted it, but it is 2 years or a year and a half before California. And I think it's going to cause the federal government, these U.S. senators and U.S. members of the House to come to the table with a 50-state solution. But right now, Florida is leading the way, and Florida is going to free our student athletes of this economic injustice that they've been dealing with for decades. And we've already got people that have a very strong social media presence, and some of them that we've spoken to with Darren, that right away, as soon as this passes, they can take advantage of their position in social media. Whether it's Dana Castellanos, who's now playing professionally. When she was at Florida State playing soccer, she had 1.4 million Instagram followers. So we think that this is a way that student athletes can compete in the free market. It's not just going to be 2 players on each sport. It's going to be really the backup kicker. If he's talented like Donald Delahaye was, he can make some money in the internet.
Okay, so many different things to unpack from what you guys have done. I think one thing, though, that you continue to hear with this bill is the timeline of it. It pushes things forward compared to what California had done with 2023. This is 2021. I think a fair question to ask is implementation really possible with this same timeline you plan for, knowing all that's going on right now with coronavirus and the health concerns we have in the United States disruptively?
Well, thanks for that question. It's a good question, considering what's going on right now. But I think July of 2021, we'll be fine. We were even sweating a little bit the 2020 implementation date. Basically, we would have gotten out of session where we are right now in this July, or our original date would have been effective. And quite honestly, that was part of the political process to get these folks to the table. We wanted to have a little bit of wiggle room, and ultimately Senator Bradley in the Senate made the amendment to move it to July of 2021. and we agreed to do the same thing in the Florida House. And here we are in just over a year. We'll be implementing this process in the state of Florida.
All right, so Darren, what do you think is the ultimate example of what success really looks like 1 year, let alone 3 or 5 years from now with this bill? Any data, metrics that you would pinpoint that say, this has been a success in that 1, 3, or 5 year span post bill being passed?
Good question. And to be honest, I would throw data and metrics aside. I think success is really allowing a free market and the market to dictate who gets the deals and what those deals look like, as long as they are legitimate and they are not provided for improper purposes. And certainly we will rely on compliance offices throughout the state of Florida to either beef up their staffs or reappropriate staffs to make sure to vet these various deals to ensure that there is no impropriety. That would be success. And whether it's one student on the student athlete on the college campus, or the vast majority of college athletes on the campus who are getting these deals, I don't think that necessitates or dictates whether or not this is a successful venture. The bottom line is it's providing these athletes the opportunity that everyone else has. And if there are no restrictions in place, but for a select few, I do want to be clear, and it's something that we've talked about and that's included in the legislation. We're not trying to put college athletes in a position where they are in any way in conflict with the universities. So to the extent that there are exclusive relationships by and between the universities or the athletic departments and third parties, there will be a gatekeeper role that the universities have in order to maintain and ensure that conflicts won't arise. But so putting that aside, if that system works as the way that we envision that it will, just the mere fact that this market will be created and exist for college athletes the same way that it exists for everybody else, to me, would be a success.
Okay. So you kind of touched on beefing up staffs and the compliance aspect that a lot of people go to when they look at anything regarding student athlete NIL. What do you think is going to be the entity, Chip, that will monitor all these deals between student athletes and marketers? Do you think it's going to go through the university? Is there going to be something at the state level? Is it a new office that's watching these things? Are they building their own entities to run it through so that it's not just monitored, but taxed all through an LLC? Like, how does this really get monitored?
So that was a big question that was part of this process. And, so we see this, that the universities will do compliance. The universities will require some type of reporting. We've talked about how that'll actually go through. Where an athlete gets a contract to do some social media posts or to be an ambassador for a brand or endorse a brand or wear a particular article, endorse an article of clothing. It could be sunglasses. It could be something, as long as it doesn't conflict with the university's contracts they have. They wouldn't wear it on the field or in the arena or on the court. They would ultimately have these side deals, and they would be monitored really just like elected officials have right now in the state of Florida. You have to report where your income comes from so that there's no perceived idea of special benefit. Why am I doing a contract with the automotive dealers and then I have a new car? I mean, the reality is it's very simple to monitor what deals are done. And then from a standpoint of the agents and that activity, that goes to the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, DBPR.
Gotcha. And what do you think is the worst case scenario? How does this fly off the rails and go completely against the vision you guys have and the guardrails that you want to see guide this in the right direction?
The way, and so I will say that, and this is a positive way, the way this goes off the rails is if the backup kicker at UCF has every option that if Bill Gates was his roommate and designed a computer, hardware and started selling it. It's the same way if, the soccer player at Florida or Florida State or softball player, women's softball, succeeds in the same way that Sarah Blakely did with the Spanx out of Florida State. I mean, there are billionaires and millionaires created every day on our college campuses. and there's absolutely no reason why athletes shouldn't have that same opportunity. But to your point, in all seriousness, where this needs to be kept a watchful eye on is that, the starting 5 offensive linemen and the quarterback for whatever university it might be get the same deal from, this was an example used by one of the chairs of criminal justice, who's a big Auburn fan. He said, well, Tim Cook can come in and he can cut a deal for all the star players at Auburn, and they can just basically buy the best team. But the reality is, we put the guardrails we put in say that you can't just offer a sum of dollars for a fake advertisement. There's got to be market examples of the same type of thing. So you've got to weigh these opportunities, whether it's a social media post, it's a commercial for a computer product, a sports product, whatever it might be, and have guidelines for that. I know that there are services out there that look at influencers as you probably do yourself. What is Dak Prescott worth versus Mahomes versus this one versus that one in the NFL to do a commercial. Now, part of that will be decided in the free market, but part of it there will have to be a top and a bottom to some of these deals, and those are the things that will get reported, and hopefully, and any glaring examples of success in my book will be looked at, and we'll say, all right, well, that's now the new top, unless it's just something that's completely out of line.
So, Darren, Chip's talking about guardrails and marketing standards in regard to marketing deals and values. But there's also standards inside of marketing where you see brand restrictions in place, right? You see first right of refusals. You see situations where an Adidas school, Miami, let's say, because they are an Adidas school, has a player who Nike wants to come in and, do a sponsorship with. Like, how do you see that getting regulated, because obviously there's going to be a lot of those conflicts with brands?
Well, absolutely. And again, it goes to an earlier point that I made, which is that there needs to be somebody or a group of individuals on each college campus who are looking and vetting each deal. So that's the gatekeeper role that they'll serve. And then they'll be comparing those deals that are proposed deals to the ones that are currently in existence by and between the universities and third parties. To the extent that there are exclusive clauses within those agreements, obviously certain deals that players bring to the table may need to be voided or just not signed whatsoever because of the fact that there's that exclusive clause. These types of deals, it's not as though we're creating a brand new system. If you think about how it works on the professional ranks, there are deals in place between various leagues and teams and third parties, and then players who have deals with competing brands when there's no exclusivity in place. You bring up the shoe and apparel companies. Well, Nike has a deal with the NFL, but that does not preclude any individual player from signing a deal with Adidas or Puma, et cetera. Obviously, that player can't use Adidas or Puma on the field of play, but off of the field, there's no restrictions. That's where it's going to be important for every university to look at the specifics of their current deals and determine with those third parties that they're already in deals with, where does the exclusivity lie, and what are the players prevented from doing? Perhaps at some campuses, the players will not be able to sign shoe and apparel deals separate and apart from the deals that are in place between the schools and third parties. One question that I've gotten time and time again is, will this actually take away dollars from the universities? The way I see it is the universities may have a new unique opportunity to build out new provisions, perhaps on the exclusivity side, to up the value of their arrangements. They now may have new leverage to bring more dollars to the table. Plus, a lot of brands don't just want to be affiliated with, in the professional ranks, a team or a league. They like affiliating with the team, league, and then a select number of players. That's how they're able to activate even better. I don't think that dollars are going to be pulled away from universities and go to particular players. I think brands are going to see a unique opportunity to remain with universities and exploit the relationship further by way of association with certain players that they believe to be a good fit for their brand, university by university.
Switching off a little bit to the government topic, Chip, we talked earlier about the fact that, you think this is something that the federal government can get involved with. You've also seen other states do similar things. Florida has definitely become a leader, especially from a timeline standpoint. Have you guys been contacted, Chip, by other states? Are they wanting to learn kind of the structure and the ways you did what you did in Florida for their state?
Well, thanks. So we have been working with other states as well as folks in the federal government to kind of understand what their timeline looks like. And quite honestly, I know there was some other folks at the national media level that were really kind of charting this out, almost like in the process, this law is really a draft, and they're trying to track where it is in different states. And for example, Nebraska is a top state that this is going on. Colorado actually just sent something to the governor, but there's concerns about it and timing on it. So what we did is we wanted to say, look, we don't want to put ourselves in a posture like we believe California did, to invoke the Dormant Commerce Clause and deal with the NCAA, name them in a suit, and end up in court for years. What we wanted to do was make sure that we got this to the student athlete, collegiate athlete, so that they could participate. And so what we did is we said, all right, well, we're going to do this in the posture that the state of Florida spends quite a bit of taxpayer dollars on universities for education, capital projects, PICO dollars, that type of thing, not for sports programs, but for the universities. So we have a contractual relationship with the universities. So the legislature made this deal directly, this law directly with the legislature, with the universities, so that we're not invoking the NCAA. We're not going after them. We're saying, look, if you're going to play in Florida, here's what we can offer you. And, a lot of folks said, well, what about going first? What about doing this? What about doing that? And my response was, look, Florida can be a leader, as you said, and for a year, 2 years, maybe longer, and maybe shorter if the federal government kind of comes in and says we have to do this nationally. But we can have a benefit to our student athletes that come to Florida. The biggest concern that of a division in the NCAA or conference that was of concern was the SEC, because we have Florida, and then all the rest of the teams are outside of the state of Florida, whereas some of the other conferences, we've got multiple teams, or they weren't as quite honestly, they weren't as strong as a conference. And as Darren can tell you, the SEC was keeping an eye on this quite a bit. The biggest issue throughout this process was keeping recruiting and actually signing and being a committed member of a team as separate as possible, so that we don't have recruitment tampering. So to the answer to your question, not only have we tracked other states and we're trying to help other states, I'm willing to go to another state and sit with their legislative folks and try to help them through the process. We want to go to Washington and sit with Marco Rubio and Senator Romney and Senator Murphy, as well as the members of Congress that have talked about this, because I think it's in a position where they've had committees and they've had hearings and got information and workshop type settings, but they haven't gotten to the point where it's front burner yet. And post coronavirus, I think we'll be talking about this becoming a serious national law.
So you have coronavirus, then you have the election. A lot of people think that this is not going to be as important to the federal government, that this is going to end up falling more on the states, especially after seeing that the NCAA is kind of waiting to see what the government will do, and not going to step in themselves to try to necessarily come up with a policy. And I think what the NCAA has also done is educate people that they're not the same as the NBA or a pro sports league who has a bunch of franchises and they can just set a rule. Conferences, I think you saw this even with coronavirus. The NCAA had to worry about their championships, but conference tournaments each had to cancel their own championship tournaments separately. There is a separation between all that. So it seems like federal government or state by state is probably a logical direction to come up with whatever this new formula for name, image, and likeness is going to be. Do you really think the federal government can make this a priority within the next 12 months with everything else going on?
I would hope that they would not, to be honest with you. As much as I think it's an important thing for collegiate athletes, I think that health, a health pandemic, an election, the economy, we lost another 10% today. Yeah. I want the federal government taking care of issues that affect all 315 million Americans and all that. So, at this point, we'll handle it state by state, but I think it's one of those things that's being talked about.
So if that's the path, knowing that there's many more important things, not that this isn't important, but it's not even close to on the level of those things, you think that this will be kind of a domino effect by states?
Absolutely. I think as you look at California was, by all accounts, by people from California, by members of the legislature who we won't name, it was a half-hearted, successful, law that was passed, but a lot of compromises were made in it. What I can say about Florida's law is all of the compromises that we made in the House to get it done were exactly what we had submitted from day one. So we had added on to the law and said we want to offer these other benefits, but at the end of the day, we protected name, image, likeness, and the ability for a student to not lose their scholarship, their grant and aid scholarship, based on any type of NIL contract, so that they can't be kicked out of school for doing this. And it's a fundamental fairness in the economy issue right now, I think, for the student athletes. And I think other states will look at Florida and say, how do we do what you just did? And this was really working together with everyone and trying to make sure that we didn't amend the heck out of the bill so that it got across the finish line in different form. We said, this was literally done at Friday, March 13th at about 11 o'clock, 10:30, 11 o'clock p.m. when it was finally voted on. So it was, we had the government, all the legislation policy would stop at midnight unless we extended session, which we did not do until outside of the budget. So getting it across the finish line was important. And I think the governor's office weighed in and said, congratulations. So that tells me they're looking forward to signing it.
So from there, that means that the goal here is simply that the states would follow. And of course, there's a competitive advantage if you do or don't have this for the schools in that state. And then from there, there's other competitive advantages that can't be controlled. And that's what I want to explore with you, kind of get into the final segment of this. So knowing that a student athlete in California would be taxed differently than a student athlete in Florida is one of many different things you could, come up with, especially when you get into bill by bill specifications and differences that will create, if it's a state by state thing, it'll create competitive advantages. Which I mean, schools already have competitive advantages, right? Like Alabama has a competitive advantage of recruiting a quarterback over Kent State, right? Like that's just reality. That's part of it.
I think you bring up one of the most important things about the fact that, look, Darren said what he said and I said what I said. Everything we've talked about to this point, outside of it being access for athletes, has been about the free market. And there is no freer state in the United States if you think about taxes, regulation, what you need to do to get a license to go into business, what you need to do to make some money, and then how you're taxed. So we both agree that this is the state that should start it. This is the state that should really launch it. There's zero state income tax. We're constantly trying to lower any type of fee or implication on you for running a business, and trying to reduce the regulatory process so you can get into business in Florida. So there's a reason why New York is now number 4 in population, and Florida is number 3 in the number of people that are here. A lot of folks have come from New York. What we always say is, whether you're coming from California or New York, please leave your voting habits behind, but bring your business and your employees with you.
I'm from New York originally. I know a lot of folks who've started as snowbirds and ended as residents in Florida. So common story. So with that, at Influencer, we started a couple of years ago really just serving revenue sport athletes, right? Like football, men's basketball, women's basketball athletes jumped on our platform to get content of themselves, pictures and videos, to grow their personal brand organically, no paid advertising or anything like that. But they've built value. They've built audiences. Our athletes have more than 50 million followers across Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat now. And we've grown from just those revenue sports to, Ole Miss Rifle uses Influencer. Field hockey team at Northeastern uses Influencer. And so I look at college sports holistically, and I think that Title IX has done an amazing job of showing the equality of all athletes, all teams, even though some sports may have more attendance and more attention. And so I look at this, and I think that if it does happen, however the powers that be figure out it will work from a regulatory standpoint, that all athletes are going to have an opportunity, not just the top 1%. But we do hear a lot that it's the other way around, that this is only going to help a very small few when it comes to college athletes. And so I just want to hear kind of how you think this will be a system of equality for revenue and non-revenue sports, men and women's sports.
Yeah, so that's an important point, because that was what we debated quite a bit on the floor of the Florida House. It was a half dozen or so folks on my side of the aisle, and I think maybe one person on the other, that were against this. And it was constantly the response was, well, it'll just be the quarterback and the tailback, the point guard and the forward, the pitcher and the top hitter that will make money off of this. And I kept saying, look, you're looking at this the wrong way. This is not just about how good I am on the field, the court, or in the arena. This is all about, I have an idea. It's Donald Delahaye, a backup kicker at UCF. Granted, the top revenue sport, but a backup kicker that was not benefiting off of his play on the field. He was benefiting off the fact that he had this personality that now gets up to 7 million views on some of his YouTube videos. So we're looking at Dana Castellanos again. I'll invoke her name again. Soccer player from Venezuela. She came highly regarded to Tallahassee. Then now she's playing professionally over in Europe. But the reality is, with 1.4 million Instagram followers, even if she wasn't the best player on that team, if she was a backup player, but she had that social presence, maybe Ray-Ban offers her an ad, maybe Oakley, maybe these different could be food or beverage, it could be things like that. And I think the free market piece of this, Joe, really gets to the point where somebody says, all right, I'm not just paying the one player that has, the most, the highest value, maybe going to the NFL. And the other thing we used with this for, we have ladies softball. There is no professional league. We have other sports that, they may have Olympic sports or other leagues after college. But for the most part, if folks in college, if they're there on an academic or a sports scholarship, athletic scholarship, if they don't make their way based on their name, image, and likeness while they're in college, and they get out and, we always said, look, they get an education, that's great. They get free room and board, that's great. And what does that mean for when they're done? If they were a star athlete in the sport that doesn't have a professional league, or they don't get drafted like 98%, what's the benefit? Well, they should be able to make some money while they're in school. And, we just thought that was the one thing that we looked at that say, the ladies soccer, ladies volleyball, ladies softball, other men's sports that don't have the big notoriety, as you said, the revenue sports. So, looking at these opportunities and saying, hey, let's give them an opportunity to make a few bucks while they're there. I don't think this is going to be millions of dollars for every athlete. I think there might be, a ladies softball player that has a Cameo account and makes $50 every time she says happy birthday to somebody. I mean, it could be any one of a million things, because I always explain to the folks, and I'm not exactly the young side, but the folks that are even older than me in the legislature, look, guys, the next invention hasn't been thought of in the gig economy or in technology. And it could be something as easy as doing a post for somebody for their mom's birthday, and they get $400 or, something, throughout the course of the month, if they do that 4, 5, or 10 times. So, I mean, we don't know what the numbers are right now. If we do see numbers that are going to be, as Darren mentioned, there'll be a gatekeeper. We see, ads for, $100,000 for all 5 starting linemen for Alabama, and, $1 million for the quarterback. We'll kind of know how that's coming in. But that was the biggest concern. And I think we can monitor this and keep an eye on it without stripping the collegiate athletes of the ability to enter the free market. I mean, to me, that's, we now have this opportunity to change kids' lives. I'll give you one last example. We had a kid here in Deerfield Beach, Florida, Bryce Gowdy, who was heading to Georgia Tech. He was accepted, as well as having the grades to go in engineering or accounting. And he was a starting tailback at the Deerfield Beach Bucks. And the day before he was supposed to go up to Georgia, he stepped in front of a train. He left his mom and siblings behind because they didn't have the money to put a roof over their head. And he was too worried about how they were going to pay for things while he was gone. Had he known that he had the ability to make a few $1,000, that maybe that makes a difference in that family's lives. So, I mean, I think that's the extreme, unfortunate situation. And then there's the fact that some of these kids just aren't able to eat or go on a date. So we rely on them so much to fill the stands and fill the arenas. We should at least trust them to be able to earn a few bucks and be able to save it and spend it and enjoy it.
Jim, I think the key word that you used was opportunity. And as far as equality is concerned, we want to provide equality and opportunities. We're not here to make sure that every athlete is equal in terms of their results and their earning capacity. It's really important to let the market dictate what their value is. But as long as everyone has the same opportunity, again, going back to an early question that you asked, that's what success looks like. It's the opportunity and the equality and the opportunity. And certainly, we're not naive to the fact that the starting quarterback at the University of Florida has a much better opportunity with regard to the results than the punter at the University of Florida. Now, that said, who knows? Maybe the punter has 5 million followers on YouTube and can earn more money. Bottom line is, both of those individuals play different positions, may have different earning potential, but they still go out into the marketplace with the same opportunity. That's the goal. That's what success looks like.
I couldn't have come up with a better closing statement. I really appreciate you guys both making the time today amidst everything else going on to talk about this bill that, like you said, was passed late Friday night, March 13th, and now is leading the charge from a timeline standpoint and specification standpoint for a lot of the other states. So appreciate the work you're doing and taking the time to explain it for all of us here in the college sports world.
Thank you.